Estamos aquí en La Verdad Nos Hace Libres y como lo hemos ido anunciando estos días, tenemos dos invitados muy especiales. Desde Francia, Estados Unidos, vamos a hacer un contacto junto a nuestro corresponsal Juan Carlos Zanders, que se encuentra en Nueva York. Estaremos también hablando con Pascal Zanders, que está en Francia, y John Gilbert desde los Estados Unidos. Antes de iniciar este diálogo sobre las armas químicas, un tema muy importante que en estos momentos se está tratando a nivel internacional, quiero mostrarles este resumen.
John Gilbert es un científico senior del Centro para la No Proliferación de Armas Químicas y Biológicas. Sirvió como oficial superior en la Fuerza Aérea de los Estados Unidos, retirándose como coronel después de más de 25 años. Sirvió y dirigió equipos de misiles estratégicos. Pasó más de 15 años gestionando organizaciones que analizaron las capacidades y sistemas de entrega de armas de destrucción masiva extranjeras. Y fue uno de los primeros inspectores in situ en Estados Unidos en la División de Operaciones Químicas y Biológicas. Ha entrenado inspectores de control de armas para los Estados Unidos, incluyendo aquellos que realizan inspecciones de misiles, nucleares y químicos. Pascal Zanders es licenciado en Filología Germánica Lingüística, Ciencias Políticas y doctor en Ciencias Políticas por la Universidad Libre de Bruselas. Es miembro del Consejo de las Conferencias PAHUA sobre Ciencia y Asuntos Mundiales para el quinquenio 2013-2018. Es director de Trench. Se especializa en cuestiones de armamento y desarme que abarca las armas químicas, biológicas, radiológicas y nucleares, así como la política espacial, utilizando estrategias de prospectiva. Participa en grupos de trabajos que estudian las oportunidades de desarme de armas no convencionales en el Oriente Medio. Ha publicado extensamente sobre armas químicas y biológicas y otras cuestiones de seguridad en inglés, holandés y francés desde 1986.
Hace poco, nada más, cadenas internacionales como la CNN en inglés, la CBS, la Fox News han estado dialogando con ellos y quiero dar la bienvenida a nuestro corresponsal desde Nueva York, Juan Carlos Salcedo, quien también nos hará la introducción y estaremos haciendo este diálogo desde Bolivia, Estados Unidos y Francia. Juan Carlos, siempre es un gusto tenerte y qué tema más delicado y tremendo el que tenemos que tratar el día de hoy. Bienvenido.
Bueno, muchas gracias, Roberto. Buenas noches a la audiencia de La Verdad Nos Hace Libres desde los estudios en Nueva York, como es habitual cada semana. Hoy vamos a poner a consideración de nuestra audiencia un tema de interés mundial. Nuevamente hemos sido testigos de un capítulo trágico de sufrimiento humano. Personas de todas las edades han sido víctimas de un ataque con armas químicas. El mundo entero ha sido consternado. Esta vez fue nuevamente Siria, posiblemente uso de sarín sobre la población civil. Es con este motivo y para hacer un análisis mucho más profundo y más allá de los titulares de prensa o de televisión, que hemos invitado a dos expertos con renombre mundial, ambos con carreras distinguidas en el tema de desarmamento, incluyendo armas químicas y nucleares. Bienvenido, Pascal Zanders desde Francia, muy cerca en la frontera con Suiza, casi en Ginebra, y John Gilbert desde Charleston, Carolina del Sur, aquí en los Estados Unidos. Welcome to the program. It's a pleasure and an honor to have you both from Europe and from the United States joining us. And I'll start with you, Mr. Zanders. In April of 1915, in World War I, Germany used chlorine gas during the conflict. At least that's how history has recorded. What can you say about the state of chemical weapons and chemical warfare 102 years later?
Well, the big difference today is that we have the Chemical Weapons Convention. In other words, the acquisition, the possession, and the use of chemical weapons is absolutely prohibited. And today, of the 196 members of the United Nations, 192 states have joined that particular convention. Only 4 states are still outside of it. That is North Korea, Israel, Egypt, and South Sudan. In other words, today, contrary to the situation in the First World War, we have a very strong norm, we have a very strong treaty, against possession and use of chemical weapons.
Thank you. Roberto.
Bueno, estamos dialogando en directo también con John Gilbert, que es un científico senior del Centro para la Proliferación de Armas Químicas y Biológicas del Centro para Control de Armas y No Proliferación, en este contacto exclusivo que tenemos para ustedes en La Verdad Nos Hace Libres. Déjeme preguntarle, señor Gilbert, la historia dice que países del mundo de una y otra manera han firmado acuerdos internacionales para el no uso de las armas químicas. ¿Qué falló para que estos no sean nuevamente firmados, ratificados o respetados?
The question for Mr. Gilbert, history says that countries of the world in one way or another have signed agreements and conventions for the use and control of chemical weapons. Is it working as expected? Do you think it has the regime of control is strong? And why some countries have refused to abide by or ratify those agreements?
Okay, I think the chemical treaty has been very effective worldwide. Both the United States and the Soviet Union, now Russia, had stocks of several tens of thousands of chemical weapon material, almost all of which has now been destroyed. Several other countries signed on to that treaty, and they themselves destroyed their chemical weapon holdings. The most recent country to become involved and give up its chemical weapons, however, was Syria. The situation that occurred several years ago, where the Syrian government conducted an attack with sarin against its own citizens in a suburb of Baghdad, led to the signature by Syria of that treaty and a guarantee by Russia that they would assist Syria in complying with the treaty's requirements. I think last week's and this week's developments have indicated that with respect to Syria, the system did break down, even though it might be beneficial in many other countries.
Thank you.
Vamos a continuar,
Roberto.
Sí, gracias Juan Carlos, pero también tenemos que preguntarle al señor Zanders, que está en Francia en este momento, ¿qué futuro, señor Zanders, qué futuro le espera a las armas químicas y nucleares, teniendo en cuenta las nuevas tecnologías que tal vez en algún momento las hacen resurgir o no, o se están utilizando otros métodos para elaborar armas más sofisticadas?
The question for you, Mr. Sanders, is what future awaits the existing chemical and nuclear weapons? New technologies will make it resurface or will make them obsolete forever?
Well, technology is always evolving, and technology always poses new challenges. It's sadly one of the characteristics of human evolution that every new technology, if it can be used for military purposes, it will be exploited for such purposes. The key aspect, the key objective of the Chemical Weapons Convention is to adapt the treaty to meet new challenges. In the 20 years of its existence, the Chemical Weapons Convention already had to deal, for example, with the question of terrorism. Terrorism was not foreseen in that particular convention. At the same time, both in scientific institutions, in the chemical industry, new molecules, toxic molecules, are being discovered all the time. Now, the treaty has to keep pace with such scientific developments. These tasks are already being undertaken in the context of the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, which is based in The Hague in the Netherlands, and there is permanent evaluation. The second aspect to retain the treaty's relevancy over the years is that all states parties are allowed to engage in research, development, and production of measures that are defensive and protect the people. In other words, there is a competition somewhere between what might be future chemical weapons and the means to protect, detect, and neutralize those threats. As long as the offensive dimension does not get the upper hand over the defensive one, then the treaty is going to remain strong and solid.
Well, I appreciate it. I have a question, a follow-up for Mr. Gilbert. You presented the issue of Syria.
It is possible to create sarin and mix it with another chemical called a stabilizer. If that's done, it could be stored for perhaps several decades. And this has been demonstrated by both the Russian and American chemical weapon programs. Another way that sarin can be prepared for use, though, is to have two different chemicals, neither of which is extremely toxic. React them together, and they can produce sarin by chemical reaction within a period of minutes, even inside a chemical munition, such as a rocket warhead or a bomb that would be dropped from an aircraft. So either condition could have occurred in Syria. Either stable sarin had been produced and not turned over for destruction when Syria signed the treaty, or new sarin was created, possibly by binary means, just before it was used. The actual area in which this could occur could be very small. It could be on the order of the size of a small laboratory room. It doesn't require a large industrial factory to make the amount of sarin that it appears was used in Khan Sheikhoun last week.
Thank you.
Muy bien, estamos nuevamente aquí desde Bolivia para preguntarles si podríamos conocer un poco acerca de este asunto que es de dominio mundial en este momento, pero de preocupación prácticamente en Latinoamérica. Esto para el señor Zanders. ¿Cómo podemos ayudar a la sociedad civil ante esta amenaza de las armas químicas y cómo los medios de comunicación pueden contribuir de alguna manera a evitar tener que lidiar con esta situación? Y por otro lado, si Latinoamérica está exenta de los efectos de una guerra y del uso de las armas químicas, ¿cuál ha sido, en este caso, su rol en las organizaciones internacionales que ven estos temas?
Well, a question for Mr. Zanders. How can society and the means of communication, media, can help to advance the agenda of non-proliferation of chemical weapons? And also a question, do you foresee that Latin America is going to remain a neutral free zone for as long as you can think? And the third part of the question was, what has been the role of Latin American countries in this whole international process?
Could you please reiterate the second question? I didn't really understand the question.
Well, the first was about civilians, society in general. The second question is about the role of media and means of communication. Uh-huh. And the third question was about Latin America and the role in the international arena.
Okay, well, civil society plays an important role. A treaty such as the Chemical Weapons Convention does not exist in a vacuum. The states parties have to interact with key stakeholders. These key stakeholders can be non-governmental organizations, but they are also academia, they are professionals, scientists, quite a few people, industry organizations also. All these organizations have to interact with each other, with their respective governments, and also with the international organization that is based in The Hague. Together, they can bring legitimacy to the policies that are being developed in the international organization, and at the same time, they can offer the states parties individually or collectively within the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons in The Hague as to future challenges, scientific, technological, military, and otherwise, and therefore help develop a number of future policy options. In the field, civil society, a variety of constituencies can help to reinforce the norm and detect and report on potential violations of the treaty. The media too play an important role. However, the media, in my personal mind, have a tendency of exaggerating what's going bad. There is quite a bit of simplification going on in terms of what the issues are, and particularly in situations like we've had last week in Idlib province in Syria, where the tendency is to view things in black and white. Because there was a chemical attack, it seems as if all the negotiations to get Syria into the convention have failed. It is as if there was no disarmament. So the media play an important role, but it's equally important for the media to be well informed about the background of things and to present a balanced view. And as to your third question about Latin America, all the countries in Latin America, as far as I'm aware of, are solid backers of the Chemical Weapons Convention. They are even part of a separate regional group, which is officially recognized under the Chemical Weapons Convention. That group is called GROLAC, which is the group of Latin American countries. It's an abbreviation. When the negotiations were taking place until 1992, the Latin American countries were the first to conclude regional agreements. There was the Andean Agreement, there was the Mendoza Agreement, and basically in those agreements, the respective parties to those agreements agreed that they would all join the Chemical Weapons Convention together. 2, that they would not have chemical weapons in the future after joining the convention. And 3, that they would never use those weapons against each other. To me, this is still a leading example of how states that can be rivals of each other can set common goals to be able to join international treaties. To me, this is still an example to the world. In the nuclear area, you find the equivalent in nuclear weapon-free zones. And of course, the Treaty of Tlatelolco is a prime example how also Latin America took the forefront.
Well, thank you very much. Mr. Zanders, I have a question for you, Mr. Gilbert. Do you think that the response of the United States was appropriate last week vis-a-vis Syria? And if we are talking about a multilateral approach to weapons control, why is it that it was a unilateral action by one country, the appropriate response?
I would have to say the approach was rather limited, and it appears that it targeted only the air base from which the attack was launched. Given that, I think one could consider it was proportional to the offense that appears to have been committed by Syria. I do regret that the United States was in a position where they were the only country that contributed to that attack. I think the other nations of the world who have an interest in peace and safety and security for people in the Middle East should also have been consulted and had an opportunity perhaps to take other steps first before this quick attack was launched. I do not know the full reasoning behind why the U.S. government decided to take that action at that time. Perhaps as more becomes known, we'll have more insight into why that occurred, and if a multilateral response could also have been conducted or could be in the future.
Well, thank you. Just very quickly before we come to wrap up this interesting roundtable, is there anything, Mr. Zanders, and also the same question for you, Mr. Gilbert, that should be added in a conversation like this that you think our audience needs to know? Please, Mr. Zanders first.
Well, I would like to build on what Mr. Gilbert has said, because one would have expected in a situation like we have seen last week that the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons would have conducted an independent investigation as to the circumstances of what happened in Idlib province in Syria. Secondly, at the same time, last week there were draft resolutions being considered by the United Nations Security Council to mandate a number of steps to be taken, possibly under Chapter 7 of the United Nations Charter, which would have allowed eventual use of force. Right now we have a situation where there was a prompt reaction by the United States, and we don't know yet what is going to be the political fallout. That it's going to have consequences for future actions is quite certain, not necessarily in Syria, maybe in different parts of the world. And I think that personally, the multilateral option should have been explored to the fullest, and it might have been good for the United States first to try and build a coalition of like-minded countries and set out a common course.
Mr. Gilbert.
Yes. Based on some recent news, it appears possible that the United States and Russia may agree to jointly support an international investigation of the events in Khan Sheikhoun last week, which would include the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons. Several years ago, there was a similar investigation headed by the United Nations, which did confirm use of sarin near Baghdad. In this case, it might be useful if a similar investigation has occurred, but perhaps goes one step further. Rather than just determining what had occurred, I think it would be extremely valuable to the countries of the world if the responsible organization and country could be identified and named. That might allow for enough political will to be established within the United Nations to take definitive action, which unfortunately did not occur over the past week, largely due to the ability of some countries to veto any action by the Security Council.
Thank you.
Okay. Muy bien, el tiempo se nos ha agotado, querido Juan Carlos, y queremos agradecerles a Jim Zanders y John Gilbert en este contacto que hemos realizado, Bolivia, Estados Unidos, Francia. Ha sido muy ilustrativo lo que hemos escuchado y obviamente la preocupación sobre el tema de las armas químicas ahí están vigentes. Yo quiero invitar a cada uno de nuestros invitados que se despida y posteriormente tú, Juan Carlos, adelante.
Well, it's thanking everybody for this roundtable, and it's inviting everyone to say goodbye and send you greetings. Mr. Zanders first.
Well, thank you I think it's very useful to bring this difficult topic to your audiences, and I'm very glad to have been able to be part of this outreach activity you have organized. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Gilbert.
Yes, also thank you very much for the opportunity. And I hope your readers get an understanding of the difficulties involved in a situation like this. And I want to pass on my sincerest hopes that fact-finding activities do occur and they lead to greater understanding both for your viewers and the other nations of the world so that they can take appropriate action.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Juan Carlos, tu despedida.
Robertito, todo bien. Thank you very much, and gracias a toda la audiencia. Un saludo desde Nueva York. Hasta una próxima oportunidad.
Bueno, y nosotros queremos agradecerles a todos ustedes. Hemos dialogado el día de hoy con dos expertos en el tema de las armas nucleares, Pascal Zanders desde Francia, John Gilbert desde los Estados Unidos, y siempre con nuestro corresponsal Juan Carlos Salcedo desde Nueva York. Espero que esta no sea la primera y última entrevista. Estaremos abordando otros temas con estas personas tan importantes que tienen un recorrido también significativo en estos temas que son delicados, que se van tratando internacionalmente, luego de lo que se ha conocido no por primera vez, sino por segunda, tercera y otras, el uso de armas químicas, y en esta última oportunidad en Siria. Gracias por permitirnos ser parte de su vida aquí desde el corazón de Sudamérica para Latinoamérica y el mundo. Esto ha sido La Verdad nos hace libres. Hasta la próxima.